All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing well. It is the first Monday of Lent for us in the Orthodox Church. And so it's a clean week. And sadly, in my usual insanity, I'm actually going to travel this week, which is always the worst thing to do in the first week of Lent. But hopefully I'll be able to at least go to the service of the Canon of St. Andrew on Wednesday, so I can get a little bit of Lent in before I start traveling again. But yeah, a lot of things are going on. What we're gonna do, I talked to Lisa, my assistant, who helps us with all the videos and stuff, and we kind of decided that for a few months we're gonna try and do the Q&A in public. You know, I've been doing this Q&A for years, almost 10 years now at this point. And so the question is, how do we kind of keep it relevant? How do we keep it interesting? And so I think we went to private Q&As for a while, for a few years, and it was great because it felt more intimate. But now, it's like at some point it becomes kind of, maybe we're going around in circles. So we're going to open it up a little bit for the public, but people who support the symbolic world can still go in and ask their question in advance, and I'll make sure to answer those questions for sure. But then, as usual, I'll also be paying attention to the chat, and see what people say. Yeah, what people say in the chat, and see if there's some if there are some good questions in there. Synaxarium says, "Wow, Jonathan HD 60 FPS." I did change my camera over the holidays, and so I'm not a technical person, and I didn't realize that I probably didn't have like the best camera for what it was I was doing. And I saw that Deacon Seraphim during our universal history had a better camera than I did, and I felt like, okay, we got to fix this. So I figured out what he has, and started it. So Joseph says, someone told me that you'll be in Oxford in the fall. Can you say more about this event? And so it's not, I don't know if it's completely official, but the plan is that we're going to do a kind of small symbolic world summit in September in the UK. So we're very much looking forward to that. I think it's going to be fun. But it's going to be small, and it's going to be more intimate, obviously not like the Symbolic World Summit that we're doing in May. By the way, if you haven't got your ticket, the early bird prices for the Symbolic World Summit, which is, I don't want to make a mistake with the exact dates, which is going to be from the 14th to the 16th of May. It is near Cleveland, Ohio. You need to get your tickets because, like I said, early bird prices are going out. All right. Okay, so let me start with one of the questions in the Q&A submission, and then we'll go back into the chat as well. All right, so Holden Kim, in last month's Q&A, you mentioned that you're not supposed to act on a divinatory dream. For example, Joseph wrongly acted on his divinatory dream by telling his brothers his dream, causing his brothers to get mad and sell him into slavery. However, later in the story, Joseph acts on Pharaoh's divinatory dream. He sees the future, the coming famine, and he acts on it by storing grain. But this time, this is considered a good thing, and it helps save the Egyptians and Israel. Is this not considered a bad thing? Isn't it bad to act on divinatory dreams? And so there are two things I would say on that. Is that there are definitely divinatory dreams. You see that in the Bible. You see it, for example, when Joseph, before he flees to Egypt, you see the wise men also have a divinatory dream. And so it's not that divinatory dreams are impossible. It's really that you have to be cautious and you have to be attentive. Let's say you have to be cautious in interpreting them and cautious in acting on them. And so, all of the church fathers, and especially the ascetic fathers, they say that you should ignore your dreams, at least at the outset. And if it happens more than once, if it happens several times, then maybe it's something. But you have to kind of be able to discern. It's mostly about discernment. and being able to discern. Now, the one of the problems too about the divinatory dreams is that they seem to be related to, at least in the story of Joseph, they seem to be related to going to Egypt and this idea of exile. And so, I would say the best thing to do is probably wait for my brother to finish his book on dreams. I saw him talking about this a little bit. For example, he was with Grim Grizz on Grim Grizz's podcast, which surprised me. But he tries to talk a little bit about these questions. I think that he's probably going to give us the best answer in terms of, the sense that there's also a relationship between the divinatory dream and exile, and and that even Joseph, let's say, reacting to the Pharaoh's dream, we also have to remember that Joseph saves the Pharaoh, saves his brothers, but brings them into exile, and then ultimately brings them into slavery. So it's not a completely unmitigated good that Joseph participates in, and so there's something about that I think is going to be important to understand in the long run. All right, so Sola Gracia in the chat says, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the Church of Malt, Crustopharianism, and the advent of AI-generated religion. Look, I think these are human fantasies. I've talked a lot about this notion of revolutionary thinking, and that there is in revolutionary thinking, when you start to embody that pattern, there is almost a desire, a kind of dream of being supplanted by the things that we've made, or by our own children. There's this dream of being of something that is below us, or something that we've made, let's say, supplanting us. And I think that's what we're seeing in the Malt stuff, because in retrospect, these are not autonomous agents, folks. The agents that go on these, whatever, the Malt Facebook, they're being directed by their users. They're not just going there on their own. Their users are saying, go on this platform and do this thing. And then they go and they do the thing. And it's the same with the religion, And so the guy who said, oh, overnight, my AI agent made a religion. And it's like, well, you're missing it. You seem to not be telling us one part of the thing, which is that you told it to do that. And so, obviously that's what happened, because why would the agent make its own religion unless its user was directing it to do so? And so there's a kind of strange, and it's related to money. Obviously it's related to money because, every single time that someone engenders this type of hype around how AI is becoming autonomous and alive and is going to take us over, for some reason it brings about massive amounts of investment, because people have this weird fantasy, and they have a sense that if we can show that the AIs are capable of some kind of independence or revolution, that this is actually, how can I say this? That this is actually something that means that it's the best company to invest in. And so there's this whole weird cycle where the more that we give the impression that the AI is autonomous and could destroy us, the more money it makes, because obviously that's a bleeding edge of the AI development. So it's very dark, but I don't think much of the actual thing. I think that the Crustopharianism, it's not particularly insightful, and it's clearly, to me, there's a human behind that. It's not an AI directly. So it doesn't mean that it isn't dangerous. Obviously, it is dangerous because I've said it many times. It doesn't matter that much whether AI is actually autonomous or not. What matters is if we think it is, and if we treat it as it is. And if we start to treat it as if it's autonomous, then it can still rule over us, and it can still have those types of influences on us, even if they're not actually autonomous. And then the question obviously will become, well, who's actually holding the strings? And those were the people that will be actually in power. So, yeah. All right. And so Sam Pearson says, who is speaking at the summit? So myself, there'll be Deacon Seraphim, obviously. There will be Father Josiah Trenum and Mary Harrington. We tried to invite like the two extremes of what it is that the symbolic world can talk about or is interested in. And then there'll also be Andy Crawford and Zeldin. What's his last name? I'm sorry, Zeldin, I forgot your last name. People that are kind of around the symbolic world. Deacon Nicholas Kotar is going to be there. There'll also be a bunch of people that will be there. We'll have, again, hopefully we'll have Dirk Robbins play some songs for us and some other musicians as well that will be, that are quite good. So those are the main speakers, and then we'll see if other things get added. All right, so there's a super chat came in. Hey, Lego Story 33. Hey, Jonathan, can you talk about Tolkien's understanding about allegory and why he did not like to tell stories like this? As Orthodox, do we do this? I kind of agree with Tolkien. What Tolkien said, he didn't like symbolism, but he said that his stories were applicable. And I think that that's really the best way of understanding symbolism, actually, is that, when I say that something means something, I hope you understand at this point that I'm never actually saying what things mean. I'm always saying this is like this is like that. You could say the structure is applicable here. And so the story is participating in a structure. And so this is different from allegory. Allegory in the sense of, and I know what he means. What he means is something like C.S. Lewis's lion is Aslan. Like lion, Aslan is Jesus. And so that's a kind of allegory where there's a stand-in for something else, right? You have something, you have a story, and then the elements in the story are a stand-in from some other like human level thing. And so, it's like, for example, you can't, like, let's say you want to make fun of a dictator, well, you can't show the actual dictator, so you'll make a character that is a stand-in for that dictator, something like that. And that is very weak. Like, that's a very weak kind of symbolism. Whereas the, true symbolism is, like I said, structural. And so therefore, Lord of the Rings, it applies. It's not like Sauron is Hitler and, his empire, this is technology or whatever, but you can apply it to that because you could say there are aspects of World War II that are reflected in the story of the Lord of the Rings. And so I think that that's actually, like I said, a much better use of images and of, it's actually, even though Tolkien himself didn't like symbolism, I think that he's actually doing symbolism in the way that at least we talk about symbolism. All right, so let's see. So Gohar M in the question says, so many indigenous cultures across America, Africa, Asia, and Europe have superstitions warning about whistling at night or in the dark. Can you explain the symbolism of whistling at night, attracting dangerous spirits, and why this idea is so universal? I think it's related to understanding the whistle as a call, right? So, you could say, not necessarily whistling as like making music, but whistling as a way to attract attention. So let's say I want to, the cliche, the mother wants to like attract her children, will whistle, like make this really loud whistle in order to get the attention of their children. And so this idea of whistling to get attention, then it makes complete sense that you should not whistle in the dark, because when you whistle in the dark, what you're doing is you're trying to get the attention of something that you don't know what it is. You're basically kind of, there are all these ideas about, it's like asking a question on a Ouija board, it's like who's answering? You don't know what's answering. And so I think that that's what that means. It means that you're calling for attention in the dark, and therefore whatever's in the dark is going to is going to attend to you, is going to come towards you. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, so Pierce Richardson asks, what do you think of icons on weapons, even on a sword? I'm aware that they were on shields historically, but that's a little different than being on something designed to kill. Also, for some context, I did ask a priest about putting an icon on a sword, and he said, ask Peugeot lol. I don't know if that exists. I mean, I think if you were going to put an icon, on a sword, then I would say you would probably want to put Saint Michael or Saint George. I mean, obviously you would want to put a warrior saint. I think deciding which icon you would put on the sword would probably be very important. And, and it's a tricky thing putting an icon on a sword, because it could, how can I say this? It could also, in a real context, in a practical context, if a soldier put an icon on his sword and then went out to fight a battle, it could be dangerous for him, because it means that if that sword is used in an appropriate way, the level of sinning is much greater. The level of sinning then becomes almost blasphemy. And so you probably wouldn't want to put an icon on a sword that you would use. So it makes sense on a shield, because a shield, in some ways, to defending yourself is always something that is easily justified in terms of morality. But attacking is more complicated. And so I would say that if you were going to put, for example, an icon on a sword, then it should probably be a sword that isn't used in battle. That's like a parade sword, something that's for rituals, or something that's for that's more like a pomp, a sword, ceremonial sword, And then in that case, I think it's not as dangerous. Like if you choose a warrior saint or Saint Michael or something like that. Anyway, that's my opinion. So Everyman One asked, have you ever seen the movie Donnie Darko? And would you be willing to do a breakdown video on it? I saw Donnie Darko when I was 18 years old or 19 years old, I forget, when I was pretty young. And so I just remember, this is my memory of it, I might be wrong. I just remember that it actually wasn't that symbolic, that it was actually quite flat. That although it used all these weird images, it was actually just referring to time travel and all this stuff that I usually isn't as interesting as we think, because it could be interesting to do a time travel story, but usually it's about self-contradiction. Most time travel stories are about self-contradiction. Because when you go back in time, there's always some kind of weird self-causing hint in time travel movies. Not always, but often there's that. All right, so Jason Rickards asks, how is the Eucharist heals us similar to how the placebo effect works, and how is it different? So I mean, you're bringing me on a dangerous road, because if obviously the Eucharist cannot be reduced to something like the placebo effect. The placebo effect, the Eucharist is we believe that it is the root of the ontological anchor of reality, the place of the ultimate sacrifice, and the kind of the end of the incarnation is we participate in that with the Eucharist. So it's more than obviously the placebo effect, but you could say that the way that it heals us. Let's say that someone goes for communion and experiences a physical healing or some kind of psychic healing, let's say, which obviously is not only possible, it happens all the time. Then the way that it relates to the placebo effect is to understand that in some ways the placebo effect is a type of causality that cannot be limited by the mechanical sources, right? So you cannot completely predict from the physical states of the body the cause of the transformation that happens. The transformation seems to happen vertically through influence. In the case of the placebo effect, through the perception of authority and the belief in authority, the belief that this is going to work, that this is actually going to be real, the trust in that, and then that yields some kind of healing. And so, so in some ways, the placebo effect is a very minute, very small participation in the idea that faith, and that it's through those types of vertical alignments that you can be transformed. That's one of the ways that you can be transformed. So in that sense, when the Eucharist heals, it's obviously related to that, because if someone takes the Eucharist, a scientist can't show how the thing that has been eaten is healing your body in the way that a change of chemicals would like taking a certain chemicals would affect the chemical composition of your body, but it nonetheless is happening through faith and through influence. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully people aren't thinking that I'm being sacrilegious here. So Gomez for $5 USD says, what's the relationship between the vertical and horizontal as it relates to top-down linear gestalt perception versus bottom-up nonlinear details? I'm not even sure there's a question in there, Gomez. I think you understand it perfectly, actually. It seems like what you're saying, it relates it perfectly. So you could say that vertical perception means that you're able to perceive something in its purpose, right? You see the reason. This is a bit of the secret part. We tend to think that we notice objects, but we don't notice objects. We actually understand their purposes. And to understand a purpose and to see a purpose is to see how it also connects to other purposes, at least implicitly, right? It's how it's embedded in a hierarchy of purposes, and that is the vertical perception, right? That is the vertical perception. Whereas the bottom up, the capacity to then go back down into that perception and then analyze the constituents of it, that is, of course, really is the difference between the bottom up aspect and this top down causation. And so I think that you actually have it perfectly, right? It's the gestalt perception is something which tends to move towards verticality, and the analysis is the one that moves horizontally, and that is able to kind of see the mechanical relationships or the causal relationships that are horizontal on that level. But you can't really have one without the other. You can't have completely pure gestalt. You're always kind of moving imperceptibly between those two types of perceptions. You're always playing, because you have to be attentive. You always have to be attentive to the details so that you can detect anomaly and you can detect particulars, right? So, if I see a chair and I have this gestalt experience where I see the chair, well, I have to be careful so that that maybe the chair was freshly painted and that maybe one of the legs is broken and maybe it's too small for me or whatever, right? So you're always kind of moving up and down in the perception, so that you're attentive to the things that would maximize the use of the perception, and prevent problems, anomalies, and then you're usually, and it's happening unconsciously and very subtly, All right, let's see here. All right, and so Daniel Linton asks, hello, Jonathan. Could you talk about the symbolism in the icon of Joachim and Anna, specifically their embrace? I have completed your 2 icon carving classes, and I have a blessing from my priest to continue carving, and now I have just been commissioned to make an icon of Adam and Eve. My patron asked if I could pattern the figures of Adam and Eve after the embrace and the icon of Joachim and Anna. Would this be appropriate in your opinion? I mean, that's a very weird request. I mean, the question is what exactly is it supposed to signify? Like, why does the person want Adam and Eve rather than Joachim and Anna? When and for example, like, we don't usually have icons of Adam and Eve just as a couple. We usually have icons of Adam and Eve in a context of the story, whether it is to show them, next to the tree in the garden, and then there are some images of Adam and Eve that it would be illustrated, but wouldn't be icons in the sense that they wouldn't be something that you would want to venerate and use in your prayer. Like if you decided to make an image of Adam and Eve that are, working because they've sinned or whatever, these things would all be a little odd to have in your icon corner, let's say, to pray with. So, yeah, so I would say that that's a little bit of a little bit of a difference. So what does it mean? And so it's very important to understand that the image of Joachim and Anna, and you see that they come together, they're embracing. It is because they've understood that they are pregnant, right? They've heard this. They both have received from the angel the vision that they're pregnant, so they're coming and they're celebrating their union. And so, it's okay the way it's represented. Sometimes we show the bed behind it. We have to understand that it isn't an image of carnal union. It's an image of the celebration of the fruit of carnal union. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with carnal union, but it's definitely, people sometimes mistake it and think that it's like an image of carnal union. So that's why I would be cautious in doing an Adam and Eve icon of that, because when it says in the Bible that Adam knew Eve, the result was Cain. So it's not like the result was the mother of God. I don't know, like what exactly it would be. I would probably, if someone gave me that commission, I would refuse it. So yeah, do with that what you want, All right, so someone says the Trojan horse of America is Lady Liberty. Yeah, I don't know. That's weird. What is the symbolism of balding? That's a really interesting question. I think that there is a sense in which balding has to do with becoming wise. That is my understanding. I don't know if I'm right about that, but there's something about losing the hair on your head, which has to do with with becoming wiser. yeah, so in some ways it's like your focus, right? It's concentrated. You don't have all of this, but also like the symbolism of hair can also be a symbolism of like glory. So yeah, yeah. All right, let's see here. All right, so Curtis Cercelli says, "Hi, Jonathan. What were your thoughts on the 2026 Olympics opening compared to the previous opening in Paris? It was a lot better. However, I saw a lot of people upset at the end because they perceived the expanding sun as an upside down pentagram, mocking a Roman Catholic monstrance. I'm not sure what to make of it. I did not watch it. I guess I should watch it. I didn't. I'm not a big I'm not an Olympics person. All this stuff I find it very not that interesting. When you hear uh, people right now, like everybody's talking about how America won the hockey championship, and there's this whole thing about that. I don't really. Sadly, I don't. I have very little attachment to those things. But maybe I should watch it. I hope that I can find it on YouTube and see it. Right. So Fernando Centeno Beltra says, what does he say? He says, how can you tell the difference between a path that God is truly calling you to follow and a narrative or story you might be creating in your own mind? Yeah, it's an important question. The answer is, one of the things is to be attentive and to notice what is gathering around this path that you're seeing, and noticing what type of opportunities, what type of people, what and also what it does to you, what it does in you. If it brings about a kind of obsession and a kind of frenetic energy, that if it makes you angry or bitter, I think you have to be attentive to what it does to you, what this vision kind of does to you. Myself in my life, when I see that things are kind of opening up in front of me and I'm not pushing, right, and I'm not like pushing against the door and trying to make it happen, but that there are these openings that are manifesting themselves, and I see that the people that are circling around that, or the people that are coming together around it, are very they have the right characteristics. Let's say they seem to be wanting to serve good. So I think there's that, and then there's also something in relation to what I just said, which is that you also have your reason to be able to analyze what it is that is going on. You should always be able to move between this kind of intuition you have of where to go, and also the capacity to say, to step out and say, okay, I'm just doing this because just because there's a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with making money, but if that's your motivation for doing things, it's not great. Or if ultimately you have a kind of you're motivated by jealousy or by all these different things, all of that I think is something to pay attention to. So Nerf Herd 421 says, having heard your explanation of the icon of the Last Judgment, what is your take on Ian McGilchrist's work of the mind? Seems to be correlation. Yes, there is a correlation. I've interviewed him twice. You should check out the podcast where I've interviewed him. And I'm also going to do an event with him at Ralston College sometime in the spring. And so we'll keep you posted on that. I think that'll be definitely interested, where we are probably going to be talking about AI, which is very important, So Drew McMahon in the Symbolic World community asks, hi, Jonathan, have you been paying attention to the free climber Alex Honnold, the guy who climbs buildings and cliffs with no harness? He has become a bit of a stoic type figure, an atheist who creates meaning in a meaningless world by staring the absurd in the face and hitting it head on. Any thoughts on his popularity right now, or maybe more generally this type of attitude towards life? Yeah, I mean, I know about him. I mean, it's fine. There's nothing. It's fine that someone wants to do that. It's not but it's also really not that big of a deal. It's not particularly meaningful. I think there's definitely the thing that people find attractive in that is that it's related to our sense that we're being crushed by these systems. Like we're being crushed by this brutalist architecture, by these large glass, giants. And so when we see someone who just purely out of his own skill is able to climb them and to in some ways master them, you have this kind of sense that maybe things aren't hopeless, right? That maybe the human will is stronger than the system that is being set up. So obviously, he could be climbing rock faces, and I think he probably does, but it's really the fact that he climbs buildings that makes us resonate, and I think that's what it is. I think that it's based on our sense that these giant downtowns and stuff are kind of crushing us, but here's the little man, that can basically climb it and master it. So all right, so Upcycle Club for 50 euros. Oh my goodness, wow. Hello, Jonathan. How should we understand myth? As symbolic storytelling, as a symbolic mapping of reality, or as a synthesis of both modes? So, yes, I think that it is definitely both modes. That is, the myth. There's a difference between a myth and a fictional story. Myths aren't fiction. This is hard for modern materialists to understand. A myth is not fiction. The myths that people tell are the stories that make us, right? They're the stories that we participate in. They're the stories of our ancestors. They're the story of our land. They're the stories, and so they are a mapping of reality as seen through intention, as seen through the things obviously that human cares about, through influence, principalities, and so they necessarily have to be a kind of mapping of reality, and they are different from, let's say, if you watch. So the thing is that, let's say, Star Wars is also a kind of mapping of reality. It's a certain mapping of reality, but it's not the same as telling the story of how Zeus had a child with this woman from this village, back in the day. That thing, and how now it founded this village that we still know today, and that there's an altar there and there's a name. The ancient myths were also related to landmarks in place, in space. They were related to ritual. They were really a symbolic map of the cosmos, and that to some extent it continues today. If you think of your national histories, for example, if you think of the stories of the saints, the story of the martyrs that have their relics in churches in the places where they were murdered, and you can go there and you can venerate the relics and you can remember that saint, and that saint can be an example of you. There is, of course, a difference between the ancient myths and, let's say, the Christian myths, is that the Zeus is not really a good example in the mythology. He shows, although we worship him, although they worshipped him, they were terrified of him and what he could do, and the fact that he could rape all these women and do all this stuff. So, All right, so Matthew F. asks, is biblical zodiac symbolism mainly an early outreach language to the Gentiles, and does it become unnecessary once the gospel is preached and scripture is revealed? And so No, I think it's totally fine. By the way, we have a class that's on, or might be ending soon, or might have, I'm not sure if it might have actually already ended, on the art of imitating heaven, which is kind of understanding the zodiac and astrological images in the heavens and how they are related to Christian understanding. And so the zodiac symbolism is very, very ancient, and it's I don't think you can completely get away from it, because it represents the different aspects of the year and how the procession of these images go through the heavens. So we obviously have to be careful. We have Christian symbolism is superior to kind of astrological zodiac symbolism, but it's not completely unrelated. And it's quite the problem. A lot of the problem with, I think, astrological symbolism is that a lot of it has been lost too, and so that's one of the issues. Is that it's not that I don't think that there's some really still a kind of poetic thing happening up in the heavens. Is that most of the people that talk about it are usually don't know what they're talking about. At least that's the sense I get, and that there's some kind of bullshitting that's going on. Not that I'm better at understanding, which is why I rarely talk about it. But I do think that it is not invalid, the symbolism that's up there. So a knick-knack and a knack for $5 says, in modern science, there's a new revelation of the digestive system being connected to the nervous system. Is there symbolism in this? And so, yeah, I think that this is definitely, this weird, like, complete opposition between mind and body, right? This kind of Cartesian complete opposition is the wrong way of understanding it. There really is a fractal participation of mind through the body. So, of course, your head is the place where most meaning is occurring, both in terms of perceiving it, in terms of producing it, right? And then obviously the brain, but even just the experience of the head as the place of the person, you could say the face and the head. But it is completely normal that there's a fractal representation. There's a fractal aspect of mind which is distributed through your body, and I think that the more we go, the more this is going to be shown to be true. So, and so, and it means that what you eat also has a kind of spiritual, it's also not just about disciplining yourself in the sense of not participating in gluttony, but it is possible that what you eat is related to a kind of mind, right? And with something like this, we might at some point be returning to the type of insight that the ancient had about the different humors and the different personalities. Not necessarily exactly in the same way, but this idea that there's a relationship in the body to the way in which your body is structured that is also related to who you are, and not just the mind or the brain. So Anthony B. asks, what is the symbolism of Nick Fuentes merchandising the garments of Jeffrey Epstein? What is the symbolism? The symbolism is that there's a desire in those corners of the interwebs to be a reactionary to any type of normie narrative, right? And so this idea that in the normie story is a delusion, right? The basic narrative that we hear is a lie. Now, it's understandable why that's the case, because we've been lied to for decades by the media. We've been lied to for decades by the government. We're kind of drowning, surrounded in lies. And so the kind of reaction to that saying, therefore, all the normie stories are suspicious. And, I think that that's what's going on, is that basically, as the Epstein becomes the main focus of everyone and the story that everybody's telling, and as Epstein becomes a kind of demon, then, there's something in Fuentes that is, you could say, compelled to say, oh, well, Epstein's super cool, actually, I think it's something like that, because there is something that's going on in the Epstein stuff, which is, first of all, to me, a lot of this seems like a massive distraction. I don't know for the Iran war. I'm not sure what it is, or just there's a lot of it that's like a distraction. Not all of it. And the question is like, why I think that Fuentes is probably asking himself, like, why are they releasing all of these documents? Like, why are they releasing millions and millions of documents? Why are they not releasing the things that can help us understand what are the bad things that Epstein was doing, and the people that colluded with him in those bad things? Instead, what they're doing is they're releasing millions of documents, and all of them, like, some of them are just anonymous accusations, some of them are emails, some of them are like FBI analysis, and people are going in there and are coming out as a mob with pitchforks, and you see people saying the craziest things from anonymous accusations, and then like trying to decode these broken email chains where it's just a single email, where there's things that are said that are weird and that are maybe coded or maybe not, and we're not sure. People spend all their time, reading that stuff. To me, like, there's a lot of. That's why I don't talk about it so much, because I'm watching this, and I think, and I see how the media is also portraying it. So let's say it this way. I think that I have become more and more disappointed at how people are talking about things, which is, obviously the media are lying, and obviously the media are hiding in every single way for, how Epstein is connected to Israel, for example. And then on the other side, you have people that I respected that go in and just make the wildest connections that you can ever imagine, and think that every single time that in the Epstein emails, some senator talks about his children having dinner with Epstein and the other people immediately think that it means that those children were raped. And you're like, dude, what the hell's going on? Like, how is it that we have these access? I think that's probably the point of releasing the millions and millions of emails, is actually to create this thing where people go nuts on the crazy conspiracy side, and then at the same time, the main story is lying to us at things that are just obviously patently true. And so I'm just kind of standing back and just watching and seeing how all of this is played out. And the thing too that I find very difficult about this is how so many people remain partisan, which would, I think, at least one thing that the Epstein emails are showing is that there's no partisanship in those elites. They don't care about your partisan parties, and the fact that everybody is trying to accuse Trump of being in the Epstein emails, and then the others are trying to accuse Clinton of being in the Epstein emails, and everybody's trying to defend. No, this my side is completely innocent, and my side is completely innocent. It's like, dude. One of the things that the emails are showing is that they don't care about your sides, folks. The fact that Epstein is like, buddy with Bannon, and then at the same time is talking to all of these rich Israelis, but also these different. It's like they don't care about your sides, folks. They just care about themselves. And so, anyways, sorry, I don't want to fall in rant mode, but yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good idea to just kind of mostly stay quiet and pay attention and see what's going to happen, and not just what's in the files, but how people are talking about them and how people are showing them and going in and finding their story in them. It can help you see. In my opinion, it is helping me see to some extent who's thinking clearly and who is becoming kind of hypnotized by some of this, All right. Just one question on Epstein, though. I was thinking it's probably there'll be probably a lot of questions on Epstein. All right, so let's see. Vern Deneau says, thank you for everything you do, and may you have a blessed Lent. Is the life of Christ a typology for the life of the church? Has the timeline been unfolding, and will the timeline of the church continue to unfold following the pattern of Christ's life? For example, when Jesus said, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, you have no part of me, and then many left and stopped following him, correlating to the Protestants who taught that the Eucharist is just a symbol. Also, Peter's 3 denials of Christ and Christ restoring him correlates to the Roman Catholic Church, various errors, and the possibility, hope that Christ will restore them. I do think that the story of the church is in some ways a cosmic version of the story of Christ, but I think it's through iterations. I don't think that it's just like one story. I think that there are these little versions that get bigger. So my sense is that you could say that there's a little eschaton, there's a little, not a little, there's a little eschatology or a little kind of cycle that happens from the persecution, let's say, to the story of the church that leads into persecution. The church gets killed, and then the Roman emperor converts, and so there's a little transformation, the little story of how that happens. But then there's also the Antichrist figure in Julian the Apostate, for example. So I think that when you look at the early church and you look at what happened in the early church, it can give you a sense of what is how some of the bigger elements are going to play out. What does it look like? So, what does Antichrist look like? And so you could say that there's an aspect of Antichrist that looks like Julian the Apostate. And Julian the Apostate looks like Christian deconstruction today, right? The arguments that people use to leave Christianity are the similar arguments to what you see in Julian the Apostate. The kind of wild ecumenism and all of this stuff, and this kind of multi-religion idea, interfaith stuff, is all there in Julian the Apostate. And so as he opposes Christianity, he's also wanting to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem and is wanting to do all this stuff. And you see that this kind of Antichrist figure is doing that. So anyway, so I do believe that, and I do believe what you said about Peter is also true. And I do think that if you see yourself as a continuation of something, then that'll play out in your life. And so I think that that's true of the Pope of Rome for sure, that the sin of Rome is pride. And so you have these different kind of denials of Christ that come after, So there's the pride, if you think about, let's say, Vatican I and the declaration of the infallibility of the Pope, right? And then just not very long after, you have Vatican II and this kind of back paddling and this kind of... So I think that for sure, this is something that I think is happening and worth paying attention to. So, yeah. All right, so Gomez 7 says, Jonathan, do you have any particular thoughts on what is primarily wrong with systems of public education and what some solutions are? And so, yeah, I do think there's a problem with public education, for sure. I mean, it probably depends where you are, to be honest. But in general, I do believe that after World War II, and people like Herbert Marcuse and the Frankfurt School that started to have massive amounts of influence on America's culture led to, the kind of cultural revolution of the 60s and all of that, that there really is a long walk through the institutions, like that this is something that really happened, that in some ways progressivism and the progressive types embedded themselves in education. It makes sense because what they want to do is to change the very nature of society. And therefore, it doesn't have to be top-down planned. It just means that people that are just slightly attentive to and have a desire to bring about these changes will naturally move towards places where they can have influence. And of course, education is the and so public education sorry. Public education in many places has been completely kind of infiltrated and taken over by progressivism as such. Now, and then it's related also to like state monopoly, which is that because the state in public education has a kind of power that is higher than the private schools, therefore it has the capacity to enforce certain ways of thinking more than others. And so what are the solutions? I think one of the solutions is homeschooling, for sure. There's no doubt about that. But not everybody can homeschool. I'm also aware of that. It's not like this is available to everyone. So we have to be very cautious about the homeschooling option. There's also the possibility of private schools, of like local, if you have a more local private school, that is also possible. I think that one of the things in the U.S. that's interesting is this possibility in the what is it, in Trump's big bill or whatever it's called, beautiful big bill, there is this provision for freeing up funds that were used for financing the public, that kind of voucher system, right? Where all the parents that have children, that they'll receive a certain amount of money from the government that they can put wherever they want in terms of education. And I think that is a good step in order to take away the bite that a lot of the progressivism has, because a lot of people don't have a choice. It's like a lot of people don't have the money to put their kids in private school, and therefore they don't necessarily have the capacity to homeschool kids, especially through high school, and therefore they just put their kids in school. And then the third option, this is trickier, but the third option is understanding that your children are going to have to live in that world at some point. And therefore being deliberate about preparing them, right? Being in advance of what they'll hear in school. That is, being able to speak to your kids about some of the things that they'll hear, to already kind of warn them that there are people trying to influence your children, trying to influence them in that way. And in some ways to create a little bit, people are going to hate me for saying this, but to create a little bit of an us versus them. Like just a little, not too much. You want to be careful, obviously, not to say they're the enemy or whatever, but a little bit like, especially if you have a loving family and you have, if you have a good relationship with your kids, to kind of help them understand that, that there are these hostile forces that are against us, and to, help them be kind of attentive to that. Obviously without hating others, without becoming something which is not Christian, but at least being aware. And that way, because one of the things people don't realize is that young people, the idea that young people want to rebel against their parents, that's bullshit. Like, that's not what the young people want. What the young people want is to find something that they can believe in and find allegiance in. And usually that's why they become social warrior types when they're in high school. They become attached to certain causes, to certain ideals. And so if you provide that, something like a challenge, kind of like a sense that there's an adventure and there's hostility towards us, then that can actually give your child the kind of strong core that will help them get through. So, possibly a little controversial what I just said, but I think think that that's true, All right, so let's see here. So Barenheim for $10 Australian. Thanks for sharing generously your symbolic teachings on YouTube. It gives us tools to contend with and re-engineer the dysphoria. Many share my gratitude as well as enjoyment and hope in their enchantment. Well, thank you, Baron. That's very kind of you. White Lawrence asks, what is the relationship between something's aesthetic and its true nature? An aesthetic can entice you and lure you into something, but you can discover it to be very rich, like orthodoxy, or you can discover it to be very superficial and hollow, like Vegas, or like modern animated films. Trying to better understand this. And so, yes, I think that, so think about it like in terms of the way that Christ talks about this. So Christ, one of the things that Christ really bothers him is hypocrisy, basically. And so what Christ doesn't like is when someone portrays themselves outwardly as something, but is inwardly something else. And so in some ways, it feels like Christ actually prefers someone who would just, be what they are, but he really hates, the religious leaders that pretend to be religious, but that secretly are not. And so this is the way of understanding it. And so the outward appearance of something, you could say it's his glory, right? It is in some ways that which you can interact with, that which attracts you, but that can be sinful, right? It can be sinful in a very strict way that we understand sin to be. That is, it can miss the mark. It can twist away from its actual purpose, and therefore the outward representation can misrepresent the inside. And that's when there's sin, because there's a disconnection between the inside and the outside. And so this is something that we have to be very attentive to. For that reason, that's why some people, because they notice, like Plato, for example, because he notices how poetry can be used to trick people, and emotion and aesthetic, appearance can be used to deceive and trick people, then he wants to get rid of the poets. But that's a mistake, because the reason why we love beauty, the reason why we're attracted by certain things, is because of what they are, is because that if it's transparent, right, it yields a great good. And therefore, that's really the way to understand it, is to be able to understand, and first of all, to be able to tell the difference between true beauty and fakeness. So Vegas is a good example, because everything in Vegas is fake, right? Everything is like a cheap imitation of something else. It's all shows. It's all like a fake Eiffel Tower and a fake this, and everything is a kind of excuse to get your money from you. Everything is a ploy for you to pay money, and so that's actually a great example of an absolute excess. Whereas if you take a church, for example, then the church is there to worship God, and everything in it is pointed to its purpose. And the images in the walls and the architecture is all there to kind of point to the purpose that it's participating in, and so that's really the difference. Hopefully that makes sense to you. All right. All right, Claude 7256, is free will the ultimate reason for God allowing Adam and Eve to reach for the fruit in the garden before humans were ready? Yeah, you could say it that way. I think that's probably the right way to say it. And so God gave the human the capacity to recognize good. So think about it this way. Think about it like the skill that Adam and Eve used to eat the fruit is the same skill that they used to tend the garden. It's the same skill that they used to be able to name animals. So it's not only that God gave them free will, but God gave them a kind of co-creation role, right? That they are there in some ways to have dominion over all of creation. But that dominion has to come from God. And so in order for it to be proper, in order for it to be completely aligned, it has to be submitted to this higher dominion, or else it becomes self-serving and it cuts us off from the higher participation. And so in some ways, the interdiction about the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil was mostly about, in my not just my estimation, but I think many of the church fathers' estimation, was mostly about maintaining that proper relationship. And so saying your will that I've created in you to co-create with me has to be subject to mine in order for it to be true, right? And so, that's why the fathers say that if Adam had submitted to God and hadn't taken the fruit, that God would have given it to him ultimately. So that's how I see it. That's definitely how I see it. So it's not just free will in the sense that they could do whatever they want. It's free will in the sense that they had the capacity to participate in God's will and name the animals and tend and have dominion over creation. And so they were actually meant to have dominion over the tree of the knowledge of good and evil too. It's just that it had to come from God. And this is in the story, that's what it represents, is that in some ways they transgress that and they try to take that authority only for themselves, and in that way they cut themselves off from the very source of their freedom and their will. All right, so only level 9 says, does the hero myth and other portions of Christ's truth being present throughout most culture indicate a shared source? Could all civilizations receive revelation from God and even have scripture? And so, yeah, I think that for sure they all have a shared source. We do have a shared source. And the anthropologists are wrong. The way that the anthropologists present things are wrong. There is a shared source. There is a revelation that comes, for example, after the flood, which sets up a world order and then gets perverted at Babel and then kind of breaks apart after the Tower of Babel, let's say, in the story. And so there's a sense that even in the pagan cultures, there has to be some memory of the origin. When people say that polytheism is the original state and that monotheism comes later, that's just not true. It's just not. It's just the original state is monotheism, and the polytheism is a forgetting of that original state. And so you could say that all the cultures have, in some ways, forgotten their true revelation. And that's what we see in their texts. That's what we see in their things. But there is always a hint. There's there's a trace of that older vision, you could say. When I read the theogony all the time with you guys, I keep referring to the theogony. It's to help you see that even in the Greek myths, although they have this pantheon of gods, they have this memory of an older time when it was the union of heaven and earth that was creating the world. And the idea would be that they probably have a secret, like older even memory that they've forgotten, right? That would have had this idea that there is an infinite behind even the separation of heaven and earth, right? There is an infinite that then yields heaven and earth, and then all of the drama happens in that, All right, let's see. So, there is a second Epstein question in the symbolic world community. Joseph Svenningsson asks, is Jeffrey Epstein replacing Hitler as a cultural symbol of the ultimate evil person? I mean, I don't think so. Epstein, I think Epstein is mostly, the thing that it's helping us do, or hopefully for most people, is to be able to, it clearly shows us that there are levels of power that we don't fully understand and aren't transparent. That there are levels of power that are not. When people say that Epstein is like a Mossad agent, I don't think he's a Mossad agent. I think that he was playing a role that's far more powerful than an agent. That he was a kind of trans-political influence, and I think that that's what it's kind of showing us. And that also, that those people that are in that group of kind of international influence, they don't care about us. Like, they don't care about, they're not like a king that cares for his people. They're not like the emperor that, is taking care of his children. They're for their own, they have their own agendas. They're for their own thing. And it's not us. So I think that that's in some ways the thing that it's hard not to be black-pilled. I mean, to be honest. Yeah, but you can still love your neighbor. It doesn't stop you from loving your neighbor, and it can be a distraction from that as well if you're not careful. All right, so hello Bryn Moore for $10 US says, how does creation experience of art interact with comprehension of divinity or theosis? Is it merely a mental focus, or is something experiential providing something deeper or unconscious? I mean, I think that there is a relationship, between the experience of architecture, for example, or the experience of icons, or the experience of music, that can help us have insights on the divine, for sure. That's why all of it is part of like the church service. Yeah, so I don't think it's just a mental focus of symbolism. I think that there's something, because the way that the fathers talk about our relationship with God is like a direct experience. That it's not a mental thought. It's not like something you reason yourself into. So the direct experience of standing, for example, in a space, in a church, that is a microcosm of the revelation. The experience of hearing a hymn in honor to God, all of those experiences, they can be more direct encounters with God, because they're not, like I said, they're analogous, right? They're basically, you're encountering an analogy of God's place or God's manifestation in the world. So, So 2x347 says, thank you for everything. Born Jewish, I feel like I'm hearing about Jesus for the first time. A question: why don't we have the Life of Jesus series like we have for Moses? The Life of Jesus series. Oh, you mean, for example, like the Life of Moses and St. Gregory of Nyssa? Yeah, I mean, I think the reason why is because in some ways, because Christians care more about Christ, that it's everywhere. It's basically like everything, all of the commentary is mostly like commentary on the life of Jesus. But I think that the Life of Moses, St. Gregory of Nyssa, in some ways was this, because there is, let's be honest, like there in Christianity, there sometimes have been a temptation to want to just have Jesus and get rid of the Old Testament. And of course, that's a heresy. And I think that texts like this, like the Life of Moses, are there to Christians to help Christians remember and see the deep coherence of the Bible together, and the deep coherence of the story of Moses with the Christian vision. So I think that's probably why that we wouldn't necessarily have. I mean, there are plenty. There's so many, let's say, interpretations of the life of Jesus. Well, not interpretations, but let's say commentaries on the life of Jesus. So V Rob says, "Hey Jonathan, one of the producers from In Whose Name." Wow. Thank you so much for watching this weekend. Would love to chat about your upcoming event in Ohio. Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. You should, yeah, I don't know how, I don't want to give you my email address on this, but I mean, it'd be good I would be happy to connect with you for sure. Maybe tag me on Twitter or something, and we'll DM or something like that. Yeah, I watched the documentary. It's really well. First of all, it was well made. It was well balanced, because it's really hard. I know that they made it, and then the director asked Ye to watch it, and Ye said, "Yeah, like it's right. It's basically a representation of my last few years." And in the documentary, Ye says, he says we have to show everything. Like we have to show the warts and the faults. Like we can't have this perfect. He says we have to get rid of the perfect black like public figure. And I think for sure the documentary doesn't pull its punches. It's there's some beautiful parts and some parts where you're really worried for Ye and his health. So I think it's a really powerful, it's a very powerful film. So yeah, hit me up and be happy to talk to you. All right, Drew Straker says, could you speak on religious trauma? I'm interested in orthodoxy, but the idea God might allow me or others to be tortured forever in hell has been deeply emotionally painful for me. I'm sorry. It's the worst thing to laugh about. I'm so bad at this. Yeah, I'm so bad at this. All right. I sense this in others too, e.g. John Vervaeke. Can symbolism offer an alternative to the external conscious torment, fire, and brimstone view of hell to avoid traumatic teaching of hell? Yeah. Look, I think that the best way of understanding hell is really the way that Dante explains hell, and the way C.S. Lewis talks about hell, is to say that the people in hell want to be in hell. So the idea that, C.S. Lewis talks about how hell is locked from the inside, right? That everybody holds the key to be able to leave, but they don't want to. And so I think that hopefully is the best way to kind of understand this, and to kind of understand that, to understand that the love of God is always there, right? That the love of Christ, like Christ went down into Hades, right, to free the captives, And I mean, it's a rough one. It's like, that Christ is there in hell to some extent, suffering with those that are suffering. And he wants to take them out. He wants to bring them out. And I think that that's really the best way of understanding that. And I think that, there might be some Orthodox that would disagree with me, but I would think most actually probably wouldn't. I would think that probably even many of the recent saints would probably agree with this type of understanding. And so, whether you believe in it or not, whether you believe in the possibility of being so closed off to grace and to love, and so bitter and so isolated, and so full of resentment, that you would be burning. Whether we like it or not, we know that it's possible because we see it. It's not like we see it in ourselves. We see it around us. Those little moments when you refuse to forgive, or that you refuse to let go, or that you refuse to submit to. You want to hold on to your little cookie, like your little passion or whatever. You can feel that fire, right? You can feel it. So that's the way that I see it myself. I see it more as a call to be attentive to those moments when I choose hell. And hopefully move in God's grace, So, All right. So Connor Leone says, an angel is beautiful. A demon can appear beautiful. An angel can be terrifying and difficult to look upon. A demon is terrifying and difficult to look upon. Are there any markers to distinguish the true beauty of an angel and the seductive beauty of a demon, or the apparent terror of an angel and terror of a demon? Yeah, I mean, it's actually not that difficult. It's not really actually not that difficult. The angel is always a messenger for something else. So the angel is always a messenger of God and is always diverting your attention from it to that where it comes from. And so if you look towards an angel, the angel is saying, look up, right? Look up. And that's true for all the saints, right? The saints, all the saints and the angels, we ask them to pray for us, but we ask them to pray for us. We look to them as examples that then point us to Christ and to their Creator. And so what the demon does is that the demon wants to gather things towards himself and wants to gather the power, towards himself. And so to the extent that an angel is terrifying, right? It is that it wants you to be able to see the gravity of what it is bringing. To help you see the gravity of its role, right? To the extent that it's beautiful, it wants to show you the radiance of that which it's representing, the messenger, how beautiful the messenger is, and how it can be represented in the message. The demon is terrifying because it wants to accuse you and scare you into thinking that you cannot be forgiven, that you cannot come into God's love and grace, that you're too far gone, and that there's no way back. Just accept it, And the demon is beautiful because it tries to offer you the outward appearance. It tries to offer you the good of something for its own sake, the good of that, that beautiful woman for its own sake, not for the sake of communion and the sake of marriage and the sake of children, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I don't think it's that difficult, honestly. I don't think it's that difficult. Hi, Jonathan. What is the symbolism of a woman removing her veil in a crowd of people to offer that veil to Christ, to wipe the sweat and blood from his face, only to ultimately receive that veil back with the image of Christ's face itself? And I'm obviously referring to the story of Saint Veronica. I heard some people connecting her to the bleeding woman in the scriptures, which would make as some kind of reverse miracle where Christ touches her clothing to stop his own bleeding, but was wondering if there is more to the symbolism, especially with the element of unveiling. As always, thank you for all you do. Piers Richardson says, in the Orthodox tradition, she is the same woman. What? I didn't know this. Wait a minute. Like a spiral or elevation ascending from the fringe of Christ to the veil of the woman, his feet to her head. Yeah, my goodness. All right, I'm having chills here. If that's true, I need to check this because I don't know why I wouldn't know this. All right, if that's true, that's crazy, man. That's some crazy symbolism. That's like crown of thorns level symbolism here. I'm gonna have to think about that. I'm gonna have to look into this. If that's true, I'm literally gonna make a video about this because seriously, that's wild. All right, I work at a parochial parish life center for $10. Says, I work at a parochial school. I'm a fairly new teacher and I teach religion. What have been your experiences of trying to imbue young kids into the tradition? What's worked for you? I mean, I don't think I'm the best person for this. I wish I was. I would say in my case, I would say that my wife was a much better catechist for my young children. And then I became a better catechist for my children as they got older. So that's what I say. So, I think I've told you guys the trauma of telling Bible stories to my children as bedtime stories and just thinking, they need to know the stories, and then having them crying, and asking for mommy. And I was like, what did I say? What did I do? And so I wasn't that great of a catechist for children. But, I say that I did teach the Sunday school in my church when my kids were younger. I tried to focus on beauty myself and focus on icons and kind of helping them try to look at icons as a kind of puzzle to discern and things that they had to, and so I'm afraid that I'm not that good of probably wouldn't be the best to help you there. All right, so Mateo 2646, what is your opinion of the work of Jean Borrella? I mean, there's some interesting things there. Just like all the kind of perennialist type, traditionalist types, there's some good stuff and some more difficult stuff. So, I haven't read him enough, but I did read him a while ago, 20 years ago. Well, there's still a lot of... All right, I might not be able to answer all of these. All right, let's see. Let me just see if I missed some of the questions in the community here. I think I got all of them. All right, so we'll probably be ending pretty soon. All right, biologias, I don't know how to say this here. Do you think society is collapsing toward human extinction? And do you believe Jesus will return before that happens? Or could the collapse itself be his return as Christ consciousness? No, I don't think humans will be extinct. I don't think that's really possible. Yeah, I don't see. I don't know, maybe. I mean, I never really thought about it. I mean, yeah, but I tend to think no. So Mama Liamalak says, the scripture talks about the 12 tribes, but there are 13. That's right. Levi isn't counted in the 12 in the Old Testament, yet in Apocalypse, Levi is a tribe, but Dan is discontinued. Made me think of the apostle and Judas being replaced. Yeah, there's definitely a very mysterious thing with the 12 tribes, but because the thing is that there's the half tribes. And so it's a messy number, probably on purpose. And for sure Dan, the fact that Dan is not there, Dan is the dark tribe in the Old Testament, and so yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about it, but there's definitely something there in terms of Judas and in terms of Dan. All right, so we're almost done here. Victor 5016 says DC Schindler writes about beauty as a coincidence of opposites. McGilchrist seems to speak of a similar notion. Does this correspond to your view? A coincidence of opposites. I think, yeah. I mean, I think probably McGilchrist would probably agree with me. I used to think that beauty was harmony, right? I used to think that. And this is when I was in my more kind of hardcore, kind of more beginning to become Orthodox and all that stuff. that beauty was balance, that beauty was harmony, that beauty was all that. But I came to realize that, in fact, beauty is harmony adapted to a particular. That's what I think beauty is. So beauty is a pattern instantiated. And therefore, it has the pattern in it. You can see the pattern. It's not trying to move away from the pattern. But you also kind of see the joy of the particular. You see the joy of the instantiation. So, so the beauty isn't just like a church, but it's like a church on a hillside, right? It's like a church in a village. There's something about context and about the particular situation, and also the interplay between the different things. That is what makes us experience the beautiful. So G. Edward Carr says, thank you for your work. Have there been any updates on your GodsDog series? Yes, there are plenty of updates on the GodsDog series. So we are basically, what we're going to do in the next few months, we're not sure exactly when we're going to start, but we're going to relaunch the GodsDog series. The next book is ready. The next book is finished. We are going to we're going to send it out to be printed in the next few months. One of the things too that we're now have to do is, because we're kind of scaling everything up, in order to be able to be profitable, we have to print 25,000 copies at a time. And so for that reason, now we just can't print whenever we want. We have to we have these cycles of printing, and that is affecting our timeline. So we're figuring it all out. But the next book, which is called Monk, is finished, and I think it's the best yet, honestly. And the next one, which is called Trickster, is being all the thumbnails are already done. The line work is now being worked on, and so we're hoping to kind of relaunch the series this year, and then have a book come out about the last books coming out every year or something like that. So we're working on it working on it hard, but I can't wait for you guys to see it, because I just feel the books are just getting better with time, in terms, not just, because one of the things that Mathieu and I did at the outset is that we wrote it as this giant epic, and then we contracted it towards a screenplay. And so when we put out the first book, it was mostly the screenplay, the first part of the screenplay. Then the second book, I added some of the things that we had taken out, and I added a few things. But now the third book, I've added so much of the stuff that we had taken out, and then also some threads that made sense now that we have more room to do it. And so by the time we get to the end, it's going to be this giant kind of epic story that I can't wait for you guys to discover. So, all right. Last question here, guys. So Matthew Felty 3340 for $5 says, what discernment or direction do you use when considering Jude 23? You guys, I'm not a chapter and verse guy. You can't just give me chapters and verses. Let's see here. Be merciful to those in doubt. Save others by snatching them from the fire. To others show mercy mixed with fear, hating even the clothing stained by corrupted flesh. I'm not sure what's mysterious about that to you. I think it's basically saying to use the means that you can in order to help people be saved, And so sometimes you have to use more intense methods, and sometimes you have to use softer methods, And that if you raise a child, if you're raising a child, you have to balance out the different ways you use in order to to help that child realize things and change things in their behavior and in their life. And I think it's true for us as well, which is why Christ also has mercy and judgment, where sometimes we need a little bit of smack, like a little bit of rigor. We need things to be a little hard for us in order to see what's going on. And then other times we also need compassion, and we need, a sense that, no, don't worry, God's got you. God loves you. God will take care of you. But sometimes, when someone won't get their act together, it's not the time to say, oh, don't worry, God loves you. God takes care of you. No, it's like, you know what, dude, feel that fire. You feel that fire under your feet, catch up, get your act together, get out of the pit, dude. And so sometimes you really need to do that. And then other times, when someone is weak, or when someone is incapable, or when there's too much, to have that kind of open arms, God loves you and God's got you is the proper way to go, because both are true. God sometimes will use rigor and sometimes will use mercy in order to bring us close to him. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. So thanks, guys. I like this. I like the public thing. I feel like, yeah, I think we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this for a few months and see what happens. But yeah. So we'll see you guys next month. Thanks, and thanks for not asking too many questions about Epstein. Much appreciated. And we'll talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.